My name is Elaine Marsh. I am 64 years old, and the thing I am proudest of in my life is a deed with my name on it and nobody else's. Sycamore Court, Hadley Mills, Ohio, 1,140 square feet, 3 bedrooms. A screened porch I have sat on every evening since 2009. I retired to this house 4 years ago after 26 years with the Franklin County Assessor's Office. And for those 4 years I have been very, very quiet. And I have liked it. That ended on a Wednesday evening in March when my son-in-law sent a text message at 7:14 p.m. while I was rinsing a pot at the kitchen sink. He didn't call, he texted. "Mom and Dad are moving in with you in May. You've got the room and they need it. It's already handled." No question mark anywhere in that message. I read it 3 times and set my phone face down on the counter and finished rinsing the pot. Outside, the neighbor's dog was barking at something down the block. Everything else was quiet. 14 days after I drove to the county program office and asked a woman in a gray cardigan for a certified copy of one specific document, an envelope came back to me in the mail with a determination letter inside. What I set on my kitchen table the morning my in-laws were supposed to arrive is the part my family still brings up when they want to make me feel like I did something wrong. I don't feel like I did something wrong. Welcome to Brave Mom Stories. Pull up a chair. I don't tell this fast because it didn't happen fast, and some of the parts that look small at the beginning are the ones that matter most at the end. I worked for the Franklin County Assessor's Office for 26 years. My title when I retired was Senior Tax Auditor. Before that, I was a field auditor. Before that, I was a file clerk who could locate any record in a 4-drawer cabinet in under 90 seconds, which is still a skill I am proud of. My husband, Bernard, was an electrician. We had our daughter, Amy, in 1987, when I was still learning what property tax exemptions were, and he was pulling wire in new subdivisions east of Columbus. Bernard died in November 2017. A blood clot. He was 59, and he had been fine at dinner and gone before the ambulance made it up our street. I don't say this for sympathy. I say it because everything that came later came from what I did in the 2 years after he died, and what I did was very simple. I got quiet. I got organized. I read every piece of paper in our filing cabinet. We had rented for 11 years. When Bernard's life insurance settled, I had 2 choices. Buy into a neighborhood I could afford on one income, or apply for the Franklin County Public Employee Housing Program, which I had been processing applications for since 1999 and had never once applied to myself because I thought it felt like cutting in line. I applied. I qualified. I had worked for the county for 22 years by then, and the program existed for exactly that reason, to let county employees afford to live in the county where they worked. I bought this house in February 2009 for $138,500. The market value that same month was listed at $224,000. The difference was real, and it came with conditions. There is a deed restriction filed at the recorder's office, 14 pages. I have read all of them more than once because it is my house, and I believe in reading what you sign. The restriction says this home must be my primary residence. It says I must certify that every year in writing. It says the approved household is me and anyone I add through a formal application process, and that any unapproved occupant living here for more than 30 days constitutes a violation. There are fines. There is a remedy clause that includes the word reversion. The program office is on the 3rd floor of the county building on Broad Street, and they are not difficult to reach. I knew all of this on the Wednesday evening my son-in-law sent that text. I knew it the way I know where my car keys are and where I put the good scissors. That is not cleverness. That is just knowing what you own. My daughter Amy is 37. She manages the front office for a family medical practice in Hadley Mills, and she is genuinely good at it. She is the kind of person who remembers that the older patients like to be called by their first names and the younger ones mostly don't. And she never mixes them up. She married Rick Denton in 2015. He's 40. He runs a landscaping and hardscaping company, 4 trucks, a crew of 7, and he does good work. His stone retaining walls don't move. I will give him that. Rick's parents are Harold and Shirley Denton. Harold is 73. He put in 30 years as a mail carrier for USPS out of Columbus and retired in 2018. Shirley is 70. She worked the serving line at an elementary school cafeteria in Westerville for 22 years. They are decent people who worked hard and ran out of cushion. In 2020, they sold their house on Mercer Avenue for $289,000 and bought a condo in Myrtle Beach, which seemed like a good idea at the time. It is the kind of thing a lot of people did in 2020. By 2023, their HOA fees had doubled, the car needed a transmission, and Harold had a hip replaced. Medicare covered most of it, and not all of it. By the time my son-in-law sent that text in March, they were back in Ohio, renting a furnished room from a woman on the east side of Columbus for $870 a month, and eating dinner at Rick and Amy's 3 nights a week. I know all of this because Amy told me in pieces over Sunday phone calls. She calls me every Sunday at 6. We talk for about 12 minutes. She has done this for 5 years, and I could tell you the sound of how her voice changes when she is about to say something she doesn't want to say. She did not call me after Rick sent that text. She texted me an hour later. "Did you see Rick's message? Just think about it. They really need help." I thought about it. I stood at my kitchen window and looked at the backyard where Bernard's tomato cages are still stacked against the fence, because I can't make myself take them to the curb, and I thought about it for a long time. Then I opened the 3rd drawer in my filing cabinet. Amy came over that Saturday. She brought coffee and a box of the almond crackers I like. She sat at my kitchen table with her coat still on, which is what she does when she's planning to be in and out. "It's just temporary," she said. 6 months, maybe 8, just until they can figure something out. I asked what they were figuring out. She turned her cup on the table. "Rick already told them, Mom. Shirley's been buying storage bins." Someone had made a decision before I was in the room. Someone had already told a 70-year-old woman to go buy bins because a room was waiting. I looked at my daughter and asked her which room she had in mind. She looked at the window, the blue one, in the back. I have a bedroom I painted blue in 2010. I called the color Admiral because that was the name on the paint chip. Amy was 23 and sat on the floor with the roller and told me it looked like a dentist's waiting room. My mother's quilt is on the bed. She finished it in 1974 in a rental apartment in Dayton with the radio on. I have never slept a night under it, but I have never been able to take it off that bed either. I asked Amy if she remembered helping me fill out my annual certification of primary occupancy in January of 2022, when I had my reading glasses prescription wrong for 3 weeks and couldn't make out the small print. She went still in the way that tells me she remembers exactly. She had sat in the same chair she was sitting in now and read me 2 paragraphs out loud so I could confirm the wording before I signed. She knew what the certification said. She had read it in her own voice in this kitchen. "Mom," she said. "I need to look at something first," I said. "I'll let you know." She was out the door in 6 minutes. I did not call a lawyer. I want to say that plainly because people always assume there must have been a lawyer somewhere in a story like this. There was no lawyer. There was me and a filing cabinet and a lamp I have had since 2003. I read my deed restriction front to back with a pencil, not a pen. I underlined what mattered and wrote section numbers on a legal pad because a document you can't cite is just anxiety dressed up as certainty. I already knew what was in it. But there is a difference between knowing and being able to say exactly which page you are standing on. Page 6. Section 4.2. The approved household shall consist only of the qualifying owner and any additional occupants approved in advance through a written household modification request submitted to the program office. I slept well that night. I want to say that because people expect me to say, I tossed and turned. I didn't. There is a particular kind of calm that comes when you finally find the drawing that matches the building. I felt that. Rick called the following Tuesday. He didn't say hello. "Have you looked at the calendar? May works for us. I've already got a truck reserved." I said May was 10 weeks away and I hadn't made any decisions. There's nothing to decide, Elaine. You have a 3-bedroom house and you live alone. Do the math. I told him there were things about my house he didn't know, and I'd like to sit down with him and Amy and go through them before anything was finalized. He laughed, not meanly, just the busy kind of laugh a man makes when he has already moved on from the conversation in his head. It's a spare bedroom, not a construction permit. He didn't know it was almost exactly that. Before I went to the program office, I want to tell you what I did on a Saturday evening in April, because it is the part of this story my family does not believe, and it is the part I most need you to understand. I went into the blue room with my measuring tape. 11 feet by 12, a closet with 2 rods. The window faces west and gets the afternoon light, which turns the walls the color of old honey for about 20 minutes on clear days. I sat on the bed with my mother's quilt pulled flat under me and thought about what it would take to make that room right for someone who wasn't me. Shirley had mentioned once, at Christmas 2 years ago, that she couldn't read in bed anymore because overhead lights gave her headaches. She needed a lamp at table level. I wrote that down on the back of a grocery receipt. I drove to the hardware store and bought a swing-arm reading lamp. $12. I put it on the nightstand and plugged it in and turned it on once to make sure the switch worked right. Then I sat in the chair by the window and looked at it for a while. People who hear this part always want to know why. If I already suspected the answer was going to be no, why make the room ready? Here is the reason, and it is not complicated. In 26 years of auditing, I was wrong about 9 times. Every single one of those 9 times, I had been so certain of the outcome that I had stopped reading at page 3. I was not going to do that to a 70-year-old woman I had sat across a Thanksgiving table from for 9 years. If the program office came back and said yes, I was going to be ready on day 1, not day 4. You cannot make a person feel welcome after the fact. You just can't. So I bought the lamp. I straightened the quilt. I noted which wall a second dresser could go against if someone needed it, and then I drove to the county building on Broad Street. The program office smelled like carpet cleaner and old paper, which is a smell I find genuinely calming. I asked for a certified copy of my deed restriction, recording number and book and page. Then I asked for the household modification request form, which was a single page labeled HM7. I filled it out at the counter with their pen. 2 proposed occupants: Harold Denton, date of birth March 1951, Shirley Denton, date of birth September 1954. Relationship to owner, parents of owner's son-in-law. Current employment status, both retired. Most recent employment, USPS, Columbus District, Franklin County Schools, Westerville. There was a box for reason, 4 lines. I used all 4. I wrote that they had sold their home, that their fixed income was approximately $900 per month combined between 2 Social Security checks, that they were not related to me by blood or by marriage, and that I was formally asking the program to determine whether they could be approved to reside with me. The clerk was maybe 28. With reading glasses, she kept pushing up. She read the form carefully. 10 business days for a determination, she said. We may follow up if anything is missing. Either way, I said. Either way, she said. I drove home and circled day 10 on my kitchen calendar in pencil. Amy called me that Sunday off schedule at 4 in the afternoon. I could tell from the first word she'd been talking to Rick. Mom, Shirley says you filed paperwork on them. I filed paperwork for them, I said, and I explained the difference. There was a long pause. I could hear her dog get up and move across the hardwood somewhere in her house. You know what's in the deed restriction, she said quietly. I do, I said. Then why didn't you just tell Rick no? And here was the thing, the real thing, the thing that is harder to explain than any section number. Because you asked me, I said. You sat at my table and said they needed help. I gave them the only honest answer I had. I asked the people who get to decide. If they had said yes, I would have set a second place at the table. I already picked which wall the extra dresser would go against. She was quiet long enough that I heard her refrigerator run and click off. "He's going to be so angry," she said. "Not I'm sorry, Mom." Not I should have told him what I read in your kitchen in 2022. Her first full thought was about temperature of her husband's feelings. If you have ever spent years managing someone else's weather instead of just telling them the forecast, you already know what that costs. Tell me in the comments. I do read them. The determination came on day 9. I was standing at the mailbox in my slippers when I opened it. 1 page. The proposed occupants did not meet the program's qualifying criteria. Harold Denton's employment history was with a federal agency, USPS, not Franklin County. Shirley Denton's school employment was in Westerville, under Delaware County jurisdiction. Neither satisfied the county nexus requirement for approved household addition under Section 4.2. The letter had a section number, a program officer's signature, and a compliance visit scheduled 12 days out. There was also a paragraph about fines, $200 per day per unauthorized occupant. I put the letter in the manila folder with the certified restriction and went inside and sat at my kitchen table without turning the light on. That evening I called Rick. I read him 3 sentences. Denied, Section 4.2, $200 a day per person, and a compliance visit already on the calendar. The silence on his end was long enough that I heard a television somewhere behind him. "Nobody enforces that," he said. I told him there was a date in the letter and a person's name attached to it. "Elaine." His voice shifted and got lower. "You went behind my back to a county office about my parents." I had told him in March. There were things about my house he didn't know. I had asked him to sit at a table with me. He had told me he didn't need a permit to move his parents. "You should have just said no, like a normal person." I said I had on the phone in March, and he had sent a truck reservation 4 days later. He called back 40 minutes later. His voice had the flatness it gets when he has organized something into a position. "Look," he said, "you're 64. In a few years, you may not want to be handling everything alone. Amy's going to be the one managing things. It makes sense to have family already established in the house before that happens." I asked him to say the rest of it. "I'm saying there's a practical side to this. If my parents are already there, then when the time comes for you to need more support, Amy doesn't have to start from scratch, figuring out the living situation." I sat with that for a moment. He did not want a spare bedroom for his mother. He wanted a foothold. He wanted his parents' names associated with my address, so that when I had a difficult year, a diagnosis, a fall, a hard winter, the people already living in my house would be Dentons, and the person managing decisions would be his wife, and the path from helping Mom to handling Mom's situation would be short and already familiar. He still didn't understand the part that made that entire plan impossible on its face, and I didn't explain it that night. I said 7 words, "Then the answer is no from me," and I hung up on my daughter's husband, which I had never done in 9 years of knowing him. I asked Amy to come over the following Sunday. She came at noon and sat at my table and didn't take her coat off. I put the numbers on the table, because numbers are the only language that cuts through when feelings have made everything else impossible. I bought this house in 2009 for $138,500. Market value was $224,000 that month. I could afford it because I was a Franklin County employee, and I qualified for a program that exists to keep county workers from being priced out of the county where they work. The difference, $85,500, was not a gift. It was a condition. The condition is that this house stays mine, stays my primary address, and stays occupied only by people the program approves. Then I turned to the resale formula on page 11. The restriction caps what I can sell this house for. 2% annually from the original purchase price, plus documented improvements. This year, my maximum resale price is $197,400. Whatever number Rick had been working from in his head, it wasn't that. I could see it on Amy's face, the recalculation happening in real time. "He thinks the house is worth a lot more than that," she said quietly. "I know he does," I said, But this is what the house is worth. This is what it has always been worth. There is no other number inside these walls. There never was. The restriction runs with the land in perpetuity. That is the actual word in the document. Not until I sell. Not until I pass. Perpetuity. Amy sat with that for what I counted as 8 full seconds. Then she said the thing that told me everything I needed to understand about how her marriage works. He is going to be devastated. Not I understand, Mom. Not I'm sorry I didn't say something in 2022 when I read your paperwork out loud. Her first complete thought was still about managing his reaction. I looked at my daughter. She has been reading the room before she reads anything else for as long as I can remember, and I taught her some of that, if I am being honest. For years, I handed her difficult things in writing because I didn't trust myself to say them in person without going sideways. I left hard truths in folders, and she learned that feelings come in envelopes and you keep your expression steady. I had no right to be surprised she had kept hers steady. I said it out loud at that table, which is not a thing I do easily. I told her that was mine to own, too. The night before the move-in date, I set the table. Not with anything sentimental. I put the certified copy of my deed restriction, the denial letter, and my most recent annual certification of primary occupancy. One name, mine, signed under penalty of perjury, in the manila folder and laid it in the center of the kitchen table where anyone coming through the front door would see it from the entry. I made sure the swing arm lamp in the blue room was on. I washed the quilt on cold and dried it flat on the guest bed. I put a pan of chicken and rice in the refrigerator with the temperature and time written on a piece of masking tape across the foil. I wrote a card by hand and set it on top of the folder. Harold, Shirley, the blue room is made up. Chicken and rice in the refrigerator, 350 degrees for 35 minutes. Please read page 6 of the document on the table before you unpack. Elaine. Then I turned the porch light on and drove to see my friend Mavis, who is 84 and lives 3 streets over, and taught me in 1994 how to read a recorded deed without losing my place. She'd had knee surgery in February, and I had been meaning to bring her the good bread from the bakery on 5th for 2 weeks. My phone buzzed 11 times while I sat at her kitchen table. I didn't look at it once. Mavis noticed. She looked at the phone and then looked at me over her tea. Already answered, she asked. Yes, I said. She nodded once and didn't ask anything else and pushed the bread plate closer to me. I was grateful for that in a way I am still not sure I could put into words. I came home at noon. Rick's truck was in the driveway. Harold's Buick was at the curb. Shirley was standing in my kitchen with the folder open in her hands. Rick was at the table with page 6 in front of him, holding it by the corner the way you hold something you have already decided to argue with. I came in through the back door. What is this? Rick said. It was not a question. I asked him to read section 4.2 out loud. He didn't. So I did, in a normal voice, slowly, because my neighbor 2 houses down had come outside to check her mail, and there was no point pretending this was a private conversation. The approved household shall consist only of the qualifying owner and any additional occupants approved in advance through a written household modification request. He said the program would never actually enforce it. I handed him the denial letter. I handed him the compliance visit notice with the date on it. You did this on purpose, he said. I told him I had asked the program office a question, and they had answered it. Harold and Shirley didn't qualify because their work history was outside Franklin County. That was not my rule. That was the program's rule, the same rule that let me buy this house in the first place. You could have just said no. I told him I had in March on the phone. And then I had asked him to sit at a table with me, and he had told me he didn't need a permit to move his parents. He stood up. He didn't slam anything. He looked at the swing arm lamp sitting on the counter. I had moved it out of the bedroom when I made up the room, wanting him to see it, wanting someone in that family to understand that I had bought that lamp for a woman I knew would probably be told no, because I had meant every word of this, and he didn't say anything about it. He just looked at it for a second, and then he walked out. Shirley put the folder down on the table, carefully, the way you set something down when you are trying not to show what you feel. She didn't look at me. Rick said it was handled, she said, very quietly, and she went out to the car. He made 2 trips loading what they'd brought in. He put nothing through the walls. Before he pulled out of the driveway, he came back up the front steps and left his key to my front door on the mat, which I had given him 3 years ago for emergencies. That was the last thing he did, and I have thought about it more than I expected to. The compliance visit happened 6 days later. The officer was young and efficient and completely uninterested in anyone's feelings about the matter. He took 3 photographs, wrote for a while, and asked me 2 questions in the same flat voice he would have used on anyone. Before he left, he looked at his clipboard. "You self-reported before any occupancy occurred," he said. "No penalty will be assessed." He did not say well done. He said nothing personal at all. But on his way down the porch steps, he turned back once and said, "You did everything right," which is not a compliment, exactly. But it is something. Amy did not call for 4 Sundays. 6 o'clock came and went, 4 weeks in a row, and I sat on the screened porch and listened to the neighborhood and did not call her either, because if I called, she would have to defend him, and I was not going to make her do that. She came on a Thursday in June. She parked in the driveway and sat in the car for a while before she came to the door. She sat at my kitchen table and picked up my measuring tape. I had left it out from checking the porch rail and held it and set it back down. "I should have told him in 2022, she said. "When I read you the certification, I should have shown him what it said." "Yes," I said. "You should have." She looked up. "And I should have driven down and had the conversation in person instead of waiting for the paperwork to do it for me." I said, "I have been handing you documents instead of sentences your whole life. I don't get to be surprised that you learned to stay quiet." She cried a little. I let her. I didn't hand her anything. We ate crackers and sharp cheddar standing up at the counter, the way we used to when she was in high school, and we were both too tired to sit down properly, and she stayed until the porch light came on by itself at dusk, the way it does on a Timer Bernard set in 2015, and I have never changed. Before she left, I told her the blue room was hers, not a future arrangement, not a consolation. Hers. She could come whenever she wanted. She could knock. My mother's quilt would be on the bed. She said that was fair. She said it the way she says things when she means them and doesn't know how else to say them. And I recognized it because it is exactly the way I say things, too. The swing arm lamp is still on the nightstand in the blue room. $12 from the hardware store on 5th. I bought it for a woman who was going to hear no, because I was not willing to say no without first finding out whether yes was possible. Every morning when I walk past that doorway and see it there, I know exactly what kind of woman I was in those months. I was not the woman who slammed anything. I was the woman who read page 6 and then made the bed. Both things are true at the same time, and I would do both of them again without changing a word. Nobody hands you a place to stand. You find the document, you read every page, and then you stand there. That is the whole lesson. That is what I know. If you have never read the deed restriction on your own home, I am asking you to go find it this week. Read all of it. Then come back here and tell me in the comments what you found. Some of you are going to be surprised. Subscribe if you want to hear what happened in July when Rick finally called me again. Because that conversation is short, and I have been waiting to tell it right. I'll see you next time.